Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second meeting of the Interoperability Matters Data Usability Workgroup. Dr. Comita, are you on?
I am. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I wanted to make sure you were on and with audio. We can hear you well. I have started the recording of the meeting. Just to remind everyone on the call, we will be recording all these meetings in place of posting any sort of minutes, but for full transparency, we wanted to be able to provide recordings for anyone who may have missed this designated time. I am going to reserve the right to mute anybody if there's a noisy background, but wanted to let everyone know that you are joining. You can mute and unmute yourself, but if you are in a noisy environment, please make sure to mute yourself, but you can unmute yourself and speak at any time. So again, reminder, the meeting is being recorded. And with that, I would like to turn the meeting over to Dr. Comita, our co-chair. Dr. Bill Gregg is not able to make today. He had a family emergency that came up and was not able, but he wanted to send his apologies. So with that, Dr. Comita, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dee Dee, and welcome everybody. Looks like we're going to have another fantastic turnout today, really exciting. And so welcome to our second meeting of the Data Usability Workgroup, part of Interoperability Matters, the election week edition. So hope you're all surviving the week well, and hope this provides a distraction in a positive way. So the brief agenda review, the structure of the meeting today. I'm going to go over just some of the overview of the group and its representation. And then I'm going to talk about some of the logistics and some of the resources available, about the way the meetings are going to run, and where you can actually find all of the information related to the work that this group is engaging in. Then I'll hand it over to Marianne Yeager to talk about the Interoperability Matters effort in general at Sequoia. Then we're going to follow up from a high level with some questions that came out of our inaugural workgroup meeting last week, and talk about that and provide some comments. The bulk of the meeting really is going to focus on a lot of the excellent work that came out of the combined Care Quality Commonwealth Joint Document Work Group, and Joe will be providing that. That'll be the bulk of the work here, and ideally we'll leave 10 minutes for some discussion at the end, and we'll go from there. I also just want to highlight the tremendous effort and heavy lift from our Sequoia team here. So thanks to all. Next slide. And just to show the membership here and the really breadth and depth of the engagement and expertise that everyone's bringing to the table here. So we really thank everybody. It's just fantastic to see that, you know, this really spans the nation and our industry of 170 organizations, over 231 participants, and you know, to date we've been having tremendous turnout. And if you just look at the list here, just show that it's really well distributed across different areas of the industry. So everybody's input and perspective to really drive how we can move the ball forward with data usability. Next slide. If you have not visited the Sequoia website and found your way to the Data Usability Workgroup, just a great shout out to the team here and all the work that they've done. You'll be able to get all of the calendar downloads. We're really, again, as we indicated last week in terms of the invites, really going to put all those available on the website rather than have it be a push. given there's so many organizations and many of them have firewalls and rules and things where they can't actually get the invites. So all the downloads are going to be there, plus the trove of all of our meeting notes. So complete transparency, the recordings, hyperlinks to all of the information related to the great work that's going to come out of this group, as well as an overview on how it fits into the greater picture of interoperability matters. So encourage you to find your way there. Download all of the calendar invites that we have for all of the meetings, and either peruse or download all of the documents that we have so far. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Marianne to talk about the interoperability matters.
Well, thank you, Dr. Comita, and good afternoon, everyone. This is Marianne Yeager. I'm CEO of the Sequoia project. So for those of you who aren't familiar with our Interoperability Matters Cooperative, we realize that there is a tremendous opportunity to harness the brain trust in our across the sector to really hone in on specific issues that would benefit from having national level coordination for public-private good. And so we structured Interoperability Matters to really serve that purpose. So this slide really illustrates how the program works. So the cooperative is actually led by a leadership council, which includes representation from Sequoia's members. And they're really the group that identifies and helps prioritize what we work on. And so they really drive our agenda, so to speak. And so they, through their process, have identified and prioritized 3 areas where we would focus our efforts, with the work being facilitated by work groups. The first of which was information blocking, followed by this work group, data usability. And then we have another one that we're looking into around emergency preparedness and interoperability needs to support that. The idea is that the work is really overseen by the membership, which is a very diverse group, with input with the Sequoia board to assure that whatever we work on aligns with our public good mission, and that also making sure we have the resources to support this effort. I will say that all of this entire activity is actually sponsored by our members. And so we really do count on them both for leadership and also to support this important work. And in the spirit of really serving as a public-private convener, we also make sure that the process includes specific intervals and times when we actually seek input through our public advisory forum, and those occur on a quarterly basis. And so the work of this group, in fact, will not only be sort of reviewed by the Leadership Council, but it will also be presented to the public for input to help inform its work most broadly and to maximize transparency. So we go to the next slide. The Leadership Council, again, is really, I've covered this somewhat verbally, but again, is really guiding our strategic direction. And we do, there are voices we don't have at the table that we think would be valuable. And also, really just making sure that we have, I would say, a cohesive direction, and that's really driven by the private sector. And so we really are very selective about what we focus on. And we're not going to focus on all aspects of interoperability. We're going to really look at those specific issues where we think we can make an actual tangible impact that affects the real world and results in progress at an implementation level. And so we really, again, believe that this is central to really making sure that a lot of interoperability roadmap and priorities can be sort of driven by the private sector. You can see our current work, and then we have other work coming up. And our members are actually meeting in December to look at what else we should be focusing on. This gives you a sense of who works with us to date. We actually have several new folks who are engaging as well. If you go to the next slide, a very diverse group across the public and private sector. And then our newest members here, we actually also are working with some new folks we'll be announcing here soon, again, as we continue to expand our leadership. We go to the next slide. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back to David, but I just want to really acknowledge and thank the Leadership Council in particular for their dedication and working with us. Believe it or not, we formed Interoperability Matters in the fall of 2018, and we're 2 years in, and we're delighted to really have an opportunity to work with you all and support this work and really have the highest confidence it's going to really move the needle in a significant way to improve semantic interoperability. So I'll turn it back to you all.
Well, thank you, Marianne. I wanted to highlight some of the key themes, and then I'll turn it over to David to fill in, more detail from what we discussed earlier this week on our prep call. We had a very energetic and robust conversation in QA chat in the window, so we wanted to at least capture some of the items and make sure that there's clarity on the themes. So I'll cover the first three items and then turn it over to Dr. Comita for the bullet points below. Basically, just to remind everybody from the charter, and again, on the website, where Dr. Comita showed you where all materials were available. You can download the recording from last week where we did review the charter, but the charter does point out that really this is an Interoperability Matters forum, as Marianne also reemphasized just a few moments ago. This is separate and distinct from the RC or the TEFCA efforts. Doesn't mean that this can't inform those efforts if appropriate, but this is separate, and this is really the industry hoping to improve interoperability in general under Interoperability Matters forum. The existing implementation guides, any scorecard rubrics or implementation guides from Care Quality Commonwealth, which we are talking about more today, Argonaut, Da Vinci, or any other work from standard organizations such as HL7 or IHE are going to be considered. So it's not that we want to reinvent the wheel. It may very well be that what we publish in an implementation guide helps tie things together and connect the dots and provide further guidance to maybe further constrain some of those guides and maybe certain areas or extend them. So think of this as a yin and yang, pulling and pushing both the industry and then hopefully informing the standards organizations. For example, the first edition of the Commonwealth Care Quality Joint Document Content Workgroup, some of its contents were incorporated into a companion guide that HL7 released last year in 2019. So just think of this as an ongoing effort and an evolution where we'll focus on those pain points that you as a work group identify, but leveraging other works where appropriate. And then last but not least, we want to make sure to emphasize that we're focused on interoperability or information exchange between systems to enable semantic interoperability. So those systems can truly harness the data, digest it, and provide wonderful innovations like artificial intelligence or clinical decision support or anything else that those last mile systems can help point out within the workflows. And with that, I'll kind of turn it over to you, David, to follow up on a few more of these points that we wanted to clarify. David, are you still there? I show that you're muted.
Oh, sorry.
There you are.
Didn't realize. Sorry.
We're talking to mute, probably. Thank you.
I was talking. Yes, I was talking to mute. Yeah, just as indicated before, we capture in all of the questions that people submit through chat or that come up as discussion, and really want to focus on the themes and be completely transparent about the high-level themes. While I think it's important to remain focused on the scope here and what this group, in particular in our first iteration, what we really hope to accomplish. And I always go back to, because we even had a great robust discussion before the group convened about what we're actually going to call the group. And the usability, I think, is really what it all comes down to. So it's really the use cases and the scope and how we stay focused on that so that we can really achieve the output that we're looking for and the deliverables. And with the excellent engagement and participation, the level of diversity and sort of tentacles and roads that we can go down with respect to the different areas of interoperability and the data, just keeping it really tight and really focusing on the scope so that we can continue to move forth with informing on how whatever data we're talking about, that really we can rise to the standard of rise that bar to have it be usable, consumable, and usable. And so that's really just at the high level. So these bullet points, when we look at, we got a lot of questions about the scope and who we can start to consider about the data and part of this work. So really, when we talk about the systems, it's really, so we're not going to be taking a narrow view, it's been traditionally considered, which is fairly myopic with just the EHRs. But we do want to continue to focus on the type of data that would fit into our 3 primary use cases that we've indicated. Same with how data can be transformed, and that how we can, we really want to inform, again, the output of this is how we can develop really easily adoptable implementation guides that ideally the industry can operationalize and develop in a fairly agile manner. And not also to preclude the different emerging standards that may be coming out, but still wrapping it around how that gets incorporated to guides, development, strategy, and really how in the end it will meet the bar of usability. So these, just to highlight those bullet points, this will all again be on the website. So I encourage you to review it, and we will continue to provide updates of themes that we see and address some of the Q&As that come out of these meetings as well. So more to come. And with that, I believe I'm going to hand it over to Joe.
Joe, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, sorry.
There you go.
It took me a second to get there.
No worries.
You can hear me okay, I trust?
Yes.
All right, let me share my screen.
And while he's sharing that, just to point out, these slides are already on the website, so you can download and follow along on your own. There is a hyperlink on that last slide that we were displaying that takes you to this document Joe is sharing. We're trying to be proactive. That was one of the questions we got multiple times last week, is where can we get access to the document that Joe shared? So there is that hyperlink under the 2020 work priorities that's taking you to here. So that hopefully gave you a few moments, Joe, to get your screen settled. So back to you.
All right, thank you. Okay, so so you should all have the ability to get to this spreadsheet, those of you who can get to Google Docs. And so what we've got here is these were the topics that we were working on. This was essentially our backlog, and we ranked it. We did kind of ranked choice ordering. So we sorted on the totals. And so you put your first choice with the number 1 and your second with the number 2, etc. And then we just added them up and sorted that way. And you'll see that we didn't go linearly. We didn't just go straight down, because some things caused us to jump around quite a bit. So the 2 big ones that took up really the vast majority of our time were the guidance for on-demand, and I'll get into that, and the lab results, because they both touched on a lot of different things. And so I'll talk to those a little bit. Now, each of these topics is linked to a page that describes it. Now, some of these pages are pretty brief. They have various scratchings of ours that, are notes that when we were doing our analysis. And so those that got worked into the final document got all cleaned up. Those that didn't still are kind of in a draft state, very, very much like ad hoc notes. So let's take a look at where we are. Oh, what I did since last week is I added this column for status, so you can see more clearly which ones we started and which ones were done. you know, there are a lot that were in progress, and you'll be able to see when we jump into those, you know, how in progress they are. So let's oh, and the other thing I've done, I'll just start here. When we get to one that's done, you'll see that I've gone through and I've added to the page when we can refer to a section in the document. I have done that. So we're going to do a little cross-referencing as we go along. All right, so the first one, data provenance, was the highest ranked one. But while we were going through the work group, it wasn't ready to go until we were so deep into things like lab results that we didn't have the ability to go back and make time for it. But the good thing is that in large part, this is just leveraging the HL7 Basic Provenance Guide. We've got a link to that. There's an older and more comprehensive data provenance guide, which is also available at a hyperlink. And I did want to mention, I just added this today, that there's another specification that I've been working on for the eHealth Exchange, which is a push specification. And we incorporated both of these guides into our push specs. So that might give us a little bit of inspiration for how we might want to incorporate those. And aside from that, you can see the original question was, you know, it was just an ask that we have recommendations for data provenance. Now, the way we worked in the previous group is these are Google Docs, and people could just add their questions, and they could annotate it with their names if they wanted. And you can answer questions as well. I don't know exactly how we're going to do that, like how we're going to use tools and such to do the equivalent, but that's how to read these documents, as they were collaborative documents. So we didn't start it, but we did research it a bit. Feel free to stop me. I know I talk quickly. Stop me if you have any questions or any reason at all.
Joe, while you're transitioning, just to remind the group, we are masters of our own domain here. So if folks feel like we would like to continue this is how the Joint Commonwealth Care Quality Document Content Work Group did it, so that everyone could access, and it was collaborative in that everybody also contributed. From time to time, people would say, hey, did you think about this, and give us the link, so we could go back and research it as staff to prepare for a next meeting with a summary of items or topics for discussion, so that we could, you know, needle down a little bit better, kind of pulling the onion layer back away to really get to the minute details that needed to have improvements. So but this is a good example of how we also referenced other information. I think another reason data provenance, I was on this work group, so speaking as an attendee, one of the reasons we did put it off for a bit was it was in ballot process as of April of 2020. So it was just finishing its ballot, and they needed time to reconcile that ballot information. So it really wasn't ready for prime time, at least in our opinion at the time, I think. At least I'm paraphrasing my own opinion, so this is my opinion. I can't speak for the whole work group, but so I think that's why we could probably pick this back up and investigate how far along. And to Joe's point, you know, look at how others have adopted it in the industry. eHealth Exchange is an example of one large network. You know, some say the largest in the U.S. It is connected to the federal partners. So, you know, how are they doing it? Is it something we should propose for the whole industry, or should we improve upon it? So this is an independent work group that hopefully will bubble up a lot of this wonderful work that others have been doing in various circles, but have it as one unified place where we can all come together and have a broader depth and breadth of stakeholders' input. So back to you, Joe. I just wanted to kind of connect those dots. Thanks.
Thank you, Dee Dee. Any other questions before I proceed? Or statements? Okay. So what we essentially did, you could think of this if you're in into the agile world, you can think of this as a backlog that we were grooming, and so that we can understand each of the backlog items. You know, as it really turns out, a lot of these things ended up being subsumed in others, and some exploded into many related topics. So my only thing, I think if I had to do it all over again, I would probably have maintained this a little more strictly as a backlog. I don't know. I don't know if we could have done that, but because, well, you'll see what we hit. Some of these topics, I guess I would say they're very holistic. You kind of have to take them all in and think them through from all the angles, and then you can write down what you're going to do. They're hard to slice and dice. So with that said, let's go to the first big one, which is the on-demand transactions. So let me get this. So I added a status here. It's done, although I did note that we could still add some guidance for requesters. Oh, I didn't finish writing this. To know how to understand. I don't like typing while I'm doing this. Okay, so here's where we covered this stuff. If you read this through, the draft analysis below covers all issues related to dynamic generation. So we hit on a ton of different things. We talked about the general idea of dynamic generation, which is, we're not just talking about content, we're talking about a requesting system and a responding system. And that responding system is, this is the area where they're generating the content in real time. And so we had to look at all the different ways in which that could happen. We looked at the clinical triggers for generating, like if you were going to generate within an EHR based on something happening, or if you were going to generate it based on somebody asking. And so we talked about that. We covered it at a generic level. So in section 2.4, we talked about all kinds of dynamic generation of documents that we said also known as on demand, because the on demand term is rather overloaded. It means a very specific thing in the IHE specs, and that we cover in 2.4.4, the on demand option. But in the more general domain of generating things dynamically, we had to cover it in a much broader way. So we introduced the basics of IHE document sharing in 2.4.1, and then we talked about sharing updates. That's when you replace or append documents. We talked about delayed document assembly, which is kind of a simple way to share updates to documents, or I'm sorry, a simple way to dynamically generate a document at the time that it's retrieved. And then we talked about on demand, the on demand option, which is a different way of generating a document on retrieve. And then we defined a new capability built on those underlying ones called delayed document assembly with look-ahead updates. And we're going to talk about this, I suspect, in this group, because it took an underlying IHE capability that, and we looked at how systems were using it in the wild. And the key thing that we added to it was the, I'm going to mention this now, but you don't have to understand it now because we'll get to it. The key thing we added to it was, in addition to it generating a document at the time of retrieve, we added this thing called look-ahead updates, which means that at the time of query, you could tell if there was a change ready to retrieve. And so that was kind of interesting how that came out. And then we also referred to the XCA deferred response option, which is a way to dynamically generate when the reason you're doing it is because you have a high latency situation. And the example there that we had was systems that are sitting on a lot of paper documents, and they actually have to have humans scan and register those documents. So those are all, that's all the dynamic stuff that came out of this one topic. And then even more, we also went on a fun journey through the encounter lifecycle, and that went into section 3.5. So let's see, I'll jump ahead to 3.5. I've got two versions of this document open. I've got a Word document so I can kind of jump around. This is the section where we, I think I may have shown you this. where we showed the life cycle of the document. I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit. So you have a document, you have an encounter 1, 2, 3 that lives in the system, and here's when it starts, and it just kind of goes on in time. And here are the interesting things that happen throughout the life cycle of the encounter. The blue arrows are when there are changes made to it. The green arrows are when somebody asks about it, and the purple and white arrows are how systems could respond to that. And so this got into all from the initial idea of a topic of dynamic generation. It got into issues like versioning. So here was a case where a responder would return an encounter document, and then the next query they would return a new version. Or in this case, they would return a document, and then in this case, they would return the same version. So we got into a lot of related topics based on this. And we talked about how to do this with the with encounters, with encounter summaries. And to do it all, we had to craft. What ended up happening was we worked these use cases from the encounter side, but when we were done, we had a generic capability that we called this. And so we moved it up into the general section, even though we only used it for encounter documents. All right, so that's what that was. I imagine as this work group goes on, we're going to go more into the depth, because right now I'm trying to keep it breadth first. But I imagine we'll go into like each particular topic a little deeper. So you'll want to go, and maybe what we'll want to do is to review this in more detail on one of these subsequent meetings to figure out if there's something we want to pick up out of this, even though I'm calling it done. You know, we might want to, there might be things that we want to pick up on, okay? And I will say this, I'll just drop this little bomb here to say that this capability of look ahead updates, it was controversial. We introduced it midway through the work group, and I think as the realization of what it meant settled in, there was some discussion, a lot of spirited debate about this capability. So I would be surprised if this does not come back up for discussion. Okay. Yes, did somebody want to say something?
Yeah, Joe, this is Dr. Freed. And I was just reviewing the charter for this group, which is about usability, and the chat from Gary Dickinson. And you are in the weeds on the technical side of how documents get created. And I'm
correct.
Inviting us to, I'm assuming at some point we're going to shift gears towards what kind of data and format of data will be most usable.
Yes. Yeah, and that, thank you for pointing that out, Dr. Freed. Yeah, it's true that the on-demand topic hit a lot of related issues. A number of those were issues that really focused on how the implementers would generate documents. But in order to figure that out, we had to walk it from the end user's perspective. So we talked about things like, with the providers, we asked them, well, how early is too early to share an encounter summary, and under which circumstances, when an encounter has changed, do you want to see a change to that reflected in a document? So at all times, we did try to return to the use case, but then once we had the use case and the various flows nailed down, we walked through, well, what does that mean to the implementers? So yeah, we don't need to go through all that stuff again. But I did want to at least introduce you to these concepts. So let's move to the next topic, which is the prioritized list of lab results. And again, I think Dee Dee made this point, but this was our our backlog. Obviously, we're expanding the scope or the view to include use cases like public health that we weren't really considering at this level, and end user rendering that wasn't as much covered here. So we'll all I'm doing today is just letting you know what our existing backlog looked like. So this list of laboratory results to be shared, that's the name that it was originally known as. It ended up like on demand, covering a lot of different topics. I would divide them into really two sections. One was the laboratory test lifecycle, which is in section 251. In that, the idea was about, it was more implementation. It was about how to convey things, like how to show that a lab was canceled, how to show that lab results were pending. It was that sort of thing. And we left a couple things undone. One was tracking labs from the order to results. And I do want to mention something from one of the chat questions that was asked on the prior call. Our focus in this previous work group was really on the interoperability where it occurs between participants on, say, Care Quality or Commonwealth. So that means the exchange of CDA documents that included lab results. But as we got into this topic, we realized that, you know, the lab result interoperability obviously extends to the original lab systems that generate those first things that might come across in a V2 message or something. So our focus expanded beyond that, but the only areas in which we were able to really have requirements with teeth in them were where it was exchanging CDA documents between, say, EHRs or HIEs. This group may consider a wider scope. Can't speak to that, but that's something that I just wanted to mention. So let's go back to this. So the lab test lifecycle was, like I said, how to express the lifecycle of a lab within CDA documents. Then the next section was about interoperable lab results, and that was huge. It took a lot of our time, and I would say from my experience, we were better at generating new tasks to do than we were at being able to complete tasks. We identified a lot of specific lab interop problems. So we had, like, I want to be able to do processing and analysis with lab results, but they're not in a standardized interoperable format. And then this original question was, I want to prioritize list of lab results to be shared, similar to a most common allergens list. And so we started down a number of these paths. And as far as we got, though, was we were able to identify a lot of problems with lab interop, just kind of capture those in one place. Problems with lab, with codes that are non-standard, with things that are text, etc. We identified the outside groups that work on this. So the SHIELD project was a big one, the Orders and Operations Working Group with NHL7. And we identified this LIVID test code mapping, which is, it's a format that comes really close to almost giving you a, yes, thank you. It comes really close to giving you an automatable formula for going from a lab-specific result to an interoperable, like a standard value, like from Loink or SNOMED or something. But we weren't able to completely connect those dots. So I actually have that identified as one of the specific open issues. Could we define a way to interpret LIVID artifacts to perform automatable translations?
Joe, just real quick, I wanted to point out there's a chat question that I'll read off and see if you can address, so maybe we can address it verbally here. How are you ensuring CLIA lab regulations are met throughout the interoperability flow, as I didn't see it mentioned?
Okay. We did not address that. Yeah, oh, I see what Robert Fried's saying. Right. So, yeah, I guess the question there would be, to whom do the CLIA regulations apply? Do they apply to the original lab system that generates the results, or do they apply to everyone along all the hops where those lab results get passed? Both. Okay. All right, great. So that would be an example where we might add something in open issues. We would say, like, address CLIA regs. So that could be something we could add. All right, good question. And by the way, Dr. Pickus, I'm very happy to have you in the group. I'm looking forward to us being able to do something with this. So you can see that there are a number of different types of tasks that we could pull off of this tree. We have some of these lab lifecycle things. These would probably be handled within HL7 by going to them. But then these ones, identifying or creating preferred value sets for labs. For the most part, I think groups like SHIELD would be the ones who would be coming up with these preferred value sets. And we could participate in them. I guess in some cases we could convene such groups to do this sort of thing. Improving the quality of the data coming from labs. This was just acknowledging it was out of our lane in the prior group, but we thought if those of us in that group were to participate anywhere we could in other venues that would allow us to improve the quality coming from those labs, then we could. I don't know if anything like this would be within the scope of this group. That would be TBD. And then identifying mappings from lab codes to standard codes. This would be, an example would be if we could identify some livid spreadsheet that had these mappings. Like we found one that was for the COVID lab values, the COVID-19. And so if we can identify those, if they're already out there, we could point to them, or we could create our own mappings. There are so many lab results. Obviously, this would be something that you'd want to pick and choose which ones to start with. And then finally, we have requirements to perform translations. So once you've identified mappings, meaning how to get from a custom lab code to a standardized lab code, then you can have requirements. And we kind of started to write those requirements, but they don't have teeth because we said, if there's a mapping, then you're required to map it, but we didn't define any mappings. I don't know if that makes sense. And it talks about whether or not it's an automatable mapping, meaning you could configure a system and wind it up and let it go, or if it's a manual mapping where something comes in and it ends up in a HIMSS department's inbox and they have to sit there and translate those lab results. So there are a lot of things that we could pull out as future tasks. Anybody that was on the previous work group, Dr. Fried or Dr. Lane, I don't know if you're on, do you want to say anything about this before we move on?
Well, I will comment that I did my best to get LabCorp involved. We actually had a meeting with LabCorp. I think we've got just a huge problem with having the quality of the lab mappings in all the different EMRs around the country is going to be a challenge. And I don't know, I think we all agreed as clinicians in that group that it was worth tackling. It would be hugely beneficial to have interoperable lab results.
All right, great, thank you. I think that I would say for this group, we can look at these. This is like a pick list of items that we want to put on our own backlog that we'll be grooming in the next, dozen or so weeks. All right. Yes. Understood. All right, so let's move on. Some of these are a little bit smaller and they're easier to follow. So I hit the two big ones. This one was a request for guidance for documents versus clinical scenarios. And this was a pain point that we got. I received this document that said it was an X, but I opened it, was really a Y. So for example, I got something that said it was a patient summary, like a clinical or a consolidation of care, a CCD. But I opened it up and it turns out it was really a discharge summary that they used the CCD format for. Or so that's kind of one pain point. And what we talked about, I think that the output of this would be something like a grid of when you have this clinical scenario, here's the good, better, best way to represent it in content. So the best way might be a CCDA 2.1 progress note. The okay way to do it might be CCDA 2.1 or a PDF wrapped in a CDA or something else. So it's that sort of thing. It's in this situation, you want to map it to this kind of content. This kind of general comprehensive view, I don't think we typically see. What you'll see is a lot of content standards that say, here's a standard, but there aren't as many top level mappings that point you to those standards. And so that's what this topic would be. Okay, any questions about it? Okay. All right, moving on. Populating meaningful narratives. This is another one that was not started. Let's see what the request was. So talking about section.txt, if it's generated or authored, what are we trying to solve? So this is a little more nuts and bolts. Talking about like the importance of narrative only sections like clinical notes or free text SIGs. So yeah, you can see what I've described here. We didn't start this one, but maybe this gives you enough to start with. See if this is something that's important. It ranked pretty high. Guidance for patient summaries. This one I marked as in progress, but we did quite a bit of work on this. It's all of section 4. And so if you look at it here, there's it's not a huge section. It's not even 10 pages long, but it talks about patient summaries. It maps them to the CCD document type. And what we did here is, I'll just summarize it. The patient summary is kind of a different requirement than the encounter summaries. The requirement that we came up with was a holistic view of a patient that says at least one current patient summary and an encounter document for each encounter. So what's a current patient summary? Well, we talked about it might be all active problems, all active immunizations, and that sort of thing. And so we had some requirements in there, but we have very few shalls in there. It's a lot of shoulds, and you might want to look at this and that sort of thing. The only shalls are, let's see. These were the shalls that you would include active problems, medications, allergies, and immunizations, and also ensure that they match the information from the most recent encounter. Then we went into detail about how you record the service dates, and we talked about how you populate them. And I know we talked about this last week. Systems are all over the map as far as how they choose to populate a patient summary, the entries in a patient summary, if you don't date constrain it at all. And so we captured this and we gave some examples and a little bit of guidance, but we didn't have much more to say about that. So if we want to refine our guidance around that, we could. And then we also talked about this special case of populating entries when a date range was requested. And do we want to advance our guidance on that? We could. We'll see. Please read that and let us know. Next one, best practices for rendering documents. We didn't start, so I'm not going to jump to that because I'm getting low on time. Guidance for sharing document instances. This was a pain point that we did address. This was in that sort of controversial thing, which was the main pain point here was that when you would request a document and get the very same content in a document, except it's just been newly generated. So that was a problem. It was considered a problem for end users because they would see what they thought was a new document, and it was just all the same stuff. And so a system could have detected it was the same. It would have had a much easier time detecting it was the same if the document ID had been kept the same. And so we came up with guidance that that required that responding systems would not return the same document with the same content and a different document ID. So it required them to reuse the same instance that they had given to you before or to some other participant before. And that turned out to be the very difficult to meet requirement. It's certainly much easier to just forget that you shared a document instance and regenerate. So we talked about this. And then the flip side is that if information has changed, then you have to share a new instance. You have to share an update to it. And that will have a new document ID. So that was covered. All right, the next one, reducing duplicate data. I'll just say that we had a lot of problems that we captured that we could have gone further into. But for the most part, all we did was we captured some suggested mitigations, but we didn't work these into the guide. And I forgot to put status here. So I would just say the status of this is I would say in progress. We have some ideas, but we need to turn into actionable requirements. Okay.
And I think that hits home with one of the comments in the chat, Joe. It says there's a huge problem for aggregated CCDs. We know it. We got to take little baby steps and take little chunk bites that we can digest at a time. Remember, what our goal is to create a table of contents for up to 3 implementation guides focused on the use cases as the charter defines. That will hopefully be something that implementers, and I'm just going to call them generically implementers, can actually deploy in probably an 18-month timeline. So all of this wonderful work that Joe is reviewing in the guide today, just reminding folks, the Care Quality Commonwealth Joint Document Content Workgroup, in case you missed last week's call, they're still in process of determining their timelines for when they're going to require and hold each other accountable to doing this inside their governance structure. So we are hoping to take and pick up from where they left off. So that's why we're familiarizing you with some of this. I know some of it's getting a bit technical, but for those who can follow, we welcome. And on the chat, we did receive, so we received a link. We've recorded that. So that's what we need, is to gather information from all of you for what may be out there that's other work that we maybe didn't identify that could be leveraged and useful as well. I know we only have about 6 minutes left, Joe, so this may be a good place to put kind of a pin, if you agree, unless you need a minute or so to finish this up.
Yeah, I'm fine. The one thing I would ask is, I think we would be okay if people wanted to add to these specific topic pages if they wanted to like review those and maybe add their own. I mean, I don't think there's anything sacred about these in progress ones. We could add to those. What do you think?
Yeah, and it does track versioning. With
Yeah.
Google Documents, good thing is we know before we introduced it to this group what it was, so we can have a stable endpoint there and
Yeah.
and show where this is added. So yes, I would welcome everyone. If anyone has issues with Google Documents, I'll just ask this up front because I know there was only 1 or 2 organizations on the last work group call when Commonwealth and Care Quality met together. But if folks have issues with Google Documents, I don't know a better way to do this. This worked very, very well, and those that did have issues found ways around it using either a personal email or something to that effect. I don't want to tell you to skirt security in your own organization by any means, but please let us know if you have recommendations for better ways to capture this. We want to have a way to capture, but also make it visible for everyone to kind of see and collaborate within.
All right, great. So in that case, then I would say, yeah, if please review this reducing duplicate data page and really any of them. And if your problem is not mentioned here, you can add it. Or if it is mentioned, you can give more detail on it, like VHIU did.
Yeah, and here you'll notice that there are some questions. You know, is there a provenance link we could use to map the original instance? Blah. I mean, if someone knows of something, please, this is where we all need to work as a community together, because I know some of you have been very active in other work groups. So we want to make sure what we're doing is not completely out of line or reinventing the wheel from what other industry groups are doing. And we definitely don't want to become a standards organization. We just want to help provide some clarity to the industry and reach consensus as a convener to start moving that bar, continuing to improve this so that health IT systems can truly be harnessed. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Comita. David, if you want to close out with any other comments, the meeting is off to you.
No, this is great, and those are great questions, and I think a lot of them really hit to the meat of the heart of the matter in terms of what we're trying to get at with the usability, and certainly near and dear to my heart and passionate about it. So thanks for the great engagement. Really look forward to the work ahead.
Well, everyone, thank you for your time today. I hope this was valuable and you learned something. Homework really is for you guys to feel free to review this information. Not that it's 100% required, but the more you know, the more you can help us and inform us from your perspective. So we will pick up next week. If there are any questions or concerns from anyone, please let us know. And hope everyone has a wonderful and safe week ahead. Take care.
Thanks, Dee. Thanks, everyone.